All right, so welcome to Weekly Dharma Gathering. My name is Gail Spiva. Welcome to part 4 of the Encountering Basic Goodness series. In this eighth session exploration, David Perrin and Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls lead meditators of any practice level in cultivating stability, clarity, and strength in body, speech, and mind through meditation techniques which draw on ancient wisdom for the contemporary world. Each session consists of short talks, meditation sessions, Q&A, and experiential learning. Sessions are 90 minutes and can be attended live, or students can watch the recording later. David Perrin will lead tonight's session, Encountering Basic Goodness Part 4, the Basics of Shamatha-Mindfulness Awareness. Tonight's session will be recorded, so if you prefer not to be seen, please take off your camera feature. Please note that you will be recorded also when asking a question. Also, if you have a question during the guided instruction or the talk, please feel free to enter it in the chat box at any time, and we'll be able to address it during the discussion period. The recording of tonight's gathering can be accessed within 48 hours via your purchased products on your Vimeo Weekly Dharma Gathering account. You'll receive an email notification once it's posted. So tonight, David Perrin is a meditation mentor and friend to students, trainees, and fellow instructors. Collaborator, syncretist, a facilitator of circle in its myriad forms, David articulates the multiplicity of meaning encompassed by a modern practice of mindfulness. As creative arts therapist, social venture business co-owner, philanthropist, partner, and father, David is passionate about infusing all locations within the mindfulness 3.0 of our time. Director of Mindful Teacher Training, original head teacher of Mindful Greenwich Village, and co-founder of Mindful Ed, a school-based program, David co-created the Mindful Certificate and Training Program with Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. Mindfulness that is beyond binary, celebrating multiplicity and intersectionality, imbued with justice and anti-oppression, is the mindfulness for all of us. So thank you, David, and please teach us.
Thank you so much, Gail. So again, want to welcome Ainsley and Jeffrey and Anna and Mark. Thanks so much for being here, for returning. Our friend Rob, who has been with us a few of these classes, is coming in now. If you can hear us, Rob, welcome. Hey, just in time. And I also want to, of course, welcome all of you who are going to be watching this, or listening to this via the recording. Thinking of you and welcoming you to attend whenever you're able to these live classes. But glad that you're listening, if that's what you're able to do. So tonight, as Gail, I believe, mentions, we're going to dive into shamatha. And so the sequence of our time together tonight will be similar to the structure of the other classes we've had. And we are going to utilize the 3 questions, which I will remind us of, or tell you if you haven't heard those yet. And then we'll use those to kind of just check in and visit with each other a moment after reflecting on the 3 questions. And then we'll just keep going into a shamatha practice session, which I'll lead, fairly traditional breath as object based shamatha practice. And then we'll have I'll share some thoughts about shamatha, and we'll have some discussion in the last third of the class. What I want to just say by way of prefacing before we do our 3 questions together is that in the previous classes, I believe it was actually the very first class when I was talking about the inspiration for this series, this course that Shante and I got excited about was particularly based on the level 1 Shambhala training. And that is a program that was as a gateway program, had been traditionally for Shambhala, something that I went through in my early days. A number of you have been through the level 1. It's a weekend program, often done in city centers, so Friday night, Saturday, and sometimes Sunday as well, retreats. So there would be Friday night after work for a few hours, and then Saturday would be a pretty full day. And then if it was also Sunday, maybe half a day, or sometimes even a full day on Sunday. And central to that retreat practice was giving meditation instruction. And many people who would come to those retreats would be pretty new actually to meditation. So maybe never meditated before, maybe tried it once or twice. And there was a very specific technique that was given as part of that instruction that still is given when level 1 is taught traditionally. And that's what we're going to engage with tonight. So as you hear the instructions for the shamatha practice, they're very true to what's been historically presented now for decades in that level 1 program. It's not the only way to teach shamatha. It's one way to practice shamatha. And so we're going to talk a lot about that tonight, just, sort of why, a little bit of the background of why that particular way of practicing. Okay. So we're getting to dive into shamatha tonight, and also just to say that everything that's been leading up, and unfortunately Shantae wasn't able to present on mind this past month in October, but so far we've had the intro, we've covered body and speech. So mind would be sort of the third of that, the body, speech, and mind trio. And so we'll hopefully get the mind talk coming in December from Shantae. We're going to pretend like we have mind, body, speech, and mind with us tonight. Some of us might be wondering if we have all those 3 things tonight, kind of like, I'm actually not totally sure. So let's do a little reflection of the 3 questions, and then just check in with each other. So kind of the meditation that will lead into the meditation. So just feeling into your seat, and these 3 questions are, as you may remember, if you've heard them before, they're pretty simple, and they're meant to just be kind of this on-ramp, in this case, to our formal practice, right? So we're just checking in, gauging how things are, touching in. And when I ask the question, you might just think of maybe 1, 2, sometimes 3 different ways to answer the question, but they're brief. And in your own practice of the 3 questions, it doesn't typically take more than a minute or so, unless you really need to spend more time on one of these questions. And that's the sense you get, like, oh, I need to actually stay here for a moment. That would be good for me to settle down and become familiar with what's going on. That's fine. But otherwise, they're really meant to be a light touch, just noticing. So the first one of these questions is, where am I? So asking each of us to ourselves, where am I in this particular moment? Where am I? Could be super specific and concrete, like I'm in this particular room, I'm on this particular land. And then it could also be, I'm in this Zoom conference, which isn't as concrete, but it's a location. Where am I? You might want to take a slightly deeper breath just to breathe in, however you've answered that question. Take that in, let that go. Move on to the second question, which is how am I doing? This is typically a two-parter, so maybe just starting with the physical, how am I? How's my body doing? How am I feeling in my body? Maybe noticing one, two, or three things about the body, whether they are points of tension and tiredness and tightness, or feeling at home and feeling at ease. How is my body feeling right now? It may naturally segue to how am I feeling in terms of my state of mind or my feelings. So there may be a correlation between body and mind and feelings, or maybe not. If there's not a direct correlation, then asking this part two, how am I feeling tonight? Am I noticing a slight fidgetiness and agitation? Am I noticing a heaviness? Tinge of anxiety? Is my mind really going from everything that's happened today? What am I noticing and how I'm feeling, how my mind is? Once you have made a nice light touch of contact with this, taking another good breath in, just feeling the fullness of our lives, like breathing in that it's all there. And then into the last question, which has to do with our motivation, the kind of why of why we showed up tonight, why we're here, could be why I'm interested in shamatha or dharma or meditation, you know, the why of being here and engaging with this specific material. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? If ever the mind kind of wanders in any of these questions, that's no problem. We're just, in some senses, gathering the mind. So, kind of coming back to a felt sense of body, if you want to take another good breath in, taking in your good intention, if something came up for you around the why, the motivation. And then kind of coming back into the space of our collective room here, opening up the eyes. And we'll do as we've done a couple of times, which is just sometimes nice to hear from each other, just little snippets. It's nice to verbalize from the point of the sharer, and then nice to hear, to remember that, we're, even though our meditation is an act that we're mostly doing within ourselves, that we're doing it together with other people. And especially important, this is not, as so many things are in our world, asynchronous. We're doing this in sync with each other, and that does make a difference. Even while we're not all in the same room, the fact that we're doing it at the same time is important, actually. So I'm going to just ask for any offerings from one of the three questions. How, for you, the where am I, how did that arise for you tonight? What did you notice?
Um, I had this sense, I don't know whether it's the time of the year. I know it looks like it's dark in here, but I have sort of every light on in this room. And I had this really strong sense of this little sort of box of light, and then I had this Richard Scary, those Richard Scary books where you kind of see the whole, this little box of light and then all the other little boxes of light around me in New York. It was kind of the feeling I had.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, that the where am I? I mean, one of the things that makes me think of is like the season, like where am I in the seasonal flow? And because we live with all of the, lights, and we get out of sync with the fact that it's getting dark really early and the nights are getting longer. So where am I in the seasons? Great. Thank you, Ainsley. How about how checking in with how you're feeling? What is something that you noticed around either in your body or mind, emotions? Just something you noticed.
I can share. I'm quite settled, and it was really, I had to rush to prepare dinner for my son, for James, and but we had it was actually, in the 19 minutes that we had, it was relatively calm and pleasant to just eat with him. But I got arrested a couple weeks ago for climate justice, and it was a really powerful communal sort of uh, experience with people that kind of were doing things for the same reason, and it has kind of set me on a good course for like the past 2 weeks. So I feel like it's kind of an afterglow.
Mm.
So it's been nice, and I just kind of was reminded of that.
Yeah, nice to reflect on that. Thanks so much for sharing, Mark. And amazing how enjoying that really quality time with your son and getting arrested could be both so positive. I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily guessed that. So thank you. And then lastly, with motivation, anybody notice something around, what's bringing you here tonight?
Yeah, it's great to be part of an intentional group, like you said, who are practicing simultaneously with common intent. This is one of two groups that I get the gift of attending, with some regularity. And it's something that I missed terribly during the time of the pandemic, is just being amongst people, some who I know and some who I don't, but just with the intention of being present. So thank you for holding this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jeffrey. And I think practicing with other people is, it's such a just a beautiful, I would say, way of getting us here and reminding us of what it's all about, and inspiring us as we go forward in our lives. So thank you for sharing that. So now we're going to do a little period of shamatha together. And I'm going to lead you, as I mentioned before, in the pretty traditional way that shamatha practice Shamatha is a Sanskrit word. It basically means calm or peaceful abiding, if that word is new to you. And I'm gonna teach it. I'm gonna share it with you. We're gonna practice according to the pretty traditional instructions. I'm not gonna spend as much time as I might normally on particularly posture. So we won't go through every point of posture. And many of you are already familiar with that technique, but if you're not, just to say that there's a lot to know and a lot to explore with posture. We're going to kind of touch on it basically. And then the one other thing I would say is the way this technique is taught in traditionally or within that Shambhala training program is as an eyes open technique. And there's more to say about that, and we can go have discussion and questions about it. I encourage you to try it tonight. And I'll just sort of start just by saying that the gaze with the eyes open, if you're not familiar with having your eyes open, the gaze is just maybe 3-4-ish feet in front of you, right? So you're kind of letting the eyelids be a little bit heavy, and so there's just this soft taking in of the visual field in front of you, right? You soften your eyes a little bit, so there's not a focus on one particular pinpoint, and you kind of let your eyes do what they're going to do. Sometimes they might want to grab hold of something, whatever they do, let them do, and just experiment, be in it, and see how it affects you. So the setup here, we're going to go through the 3 aspects of shamatha, which is the posture, the setup, how to work with the breath, and then thirdly, what to do as our mind engages with the practice. So we'll first spend a few moments here on posture. And one of the things I like to say is that, shamatha is sometimes it's thought of, when I have this little bell here, when the bell rings, that's like the start of the shamatha period. And for me, the bell is nice to mark a beginning of something, but I always like to think, we're doing shamatha the minute we begin to bring our attention to any aspect of it. So certainly the posture. And it also doesn't mean that you have to get completely still right away. You can feel free to shift around and move and feel what's comfortable. And at any point, you can do that in the practice. It's not a statue practice. So have the freedom, feel the freedom to move into it and move around in it a little bit. And then just notice when might be fidgeting. Notice the difference between moving into your posture and adjusting that posture whenever it feels right in the practice, and then what if might be a kind of a habitual fidgeting in whatever way. And that even in itself is not a bad thing. We want to just kind of notice where we might want to move, and yet it's not as necessary as other times where it feels like, I'm going to shift myself and I'm going to bring intention to that. So feeling your backside, sitting in whatever you're sitting in and on. So whether it's a cushion or your chair, just starting there, dropping your mind into that backside. Either your legs are crossed in a sitting position, or your feet are flat on the floor if you're in a chair. They can be loosely crossed if you're sitting on a cushion. And we won't talk too much about kind of the knees being a little bit lower than the hips, but that is ideal either in a chair or on a cushion. We're setting ourselves up so that the spine can be nice and tall and long. And we can feel like a lot of the weight of our body is supported by our backside. The shoulders are relaxed, the front of the body is open, the back body supports us with some strength. Hands are just resting as they might in the lap. jaw is nice and relaxed. There might be a gentle kind of parting of the lips a little bit, so that wherever the tongue rests is fine. You may want to begin to just kind of notice how breath is passing in and out of the body. So the posture feels more or less comfortable and relaxed on any given day and for any given body. Adjustments are always encouraged if there's real pain or tension or discomfort. And in whatever way we begin to feel ourselves, feel our way into a settling somewhat in the body, which happens bit by bit. That's when we turn ourselves to the breath. Having that initial noticing of just noticing breath moving, having a sense of that feeling of movement of the body breathing. And I'm going to invite you to begin to bring a special focus to the out breath. So in this technique, we're invited to notice the breath going out. So maybe trying that a few times, emphasizing the out breath. You don't have to make the out breath bigger per se or change it in any way, but emphasizing your attention to just be with the out breath. Don't worry about the in breath, it happens on its own. Really noticing and riding that out breath out. It's like a wave coming onto shore and soaking into the sand. It doesn't so much matter whether it's through the nose or the mouth or some combination, some hybrid of breath going out. And as the out breath runs all the way out, imagining that there's a dissolving of your attention into the space around you. And having your intention be just to kind of hang out in that space as you dissolve with that out breath. Hanging out in the space. Again, the in-breath is going to be going on its own, which is fine. But there's an ever so slight effort to just stay dissolved in space as the in-breath happens so that you can pick up the next out-breath going out. It's very normal to be noticing thoughts and distractions carrying us away from that out breath going out. So that's a moment to just take a really gentle and slight pause just to acknowledge, oh yeah, that's my thoughts. I'm noticing a feeling coming up. Kind of honor that and then invite yourself back to the next out breath. Almost as if the out breath was releasing whatever the distraction or whatever we're caught up in. Dissolving it in a sense of friendly space around us. And the next out breath. And again, coming back if there's been a mental straying. Back to that next out breath that whooshes out of the body. And as the air dissolves into the space around us, so too our mind, in a sense, dissolves into that space as well. And it's okay if dissolving into that space doesn't feel entirely comfortable, or you feel like you have to work a little bit to stay with that, or maybe it's very easeful for you. Whatever the experience is, letting go of the commentary and just riding that next out breath going out, even if we just did that a few times. And coming back if we've wandered off. And you might very slightly deepen your out breath so that what I mean by that is that really feel the fullness of the breath going all the way out. In breath on its own will be a little bit deeper, and then really letting all that out breath go out. And in a moment, I'm going to ring that bell that I rang earlier and see if you can follow the sound of the bell until it goes all the way out, just like the out breath going all the way out, hearing this bell until you can't hear it anymore. Just allowing that to lift your gaze. You might want to bring a little bit of gentle movement. Okay, so I want to share not really extensive remarks on shamatha, but just a few things, and then we can have some good discussion, and would welcome any observations you had from doing this practice, whether it's familiar or new, or you're reacquainting yourself with it. We can have some good discussion in a few minutes. What I want to start with talking about is the notion of bringing the three gates of body, speech, and mind together. And so one of the ways that I've always appreciated, I think meditation generally, but certainly shamatha practice as this peaceful or calm abiding, is this notion of synchronizing ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I often over the course of my day feel out of sync with myself, with my environment, body, speech, and mind ways. And so just appreciating that there is a technique that encourages knitting those three things together so they're all kind of on the same page. That we're getting our body and our minds on the same page, and then the expression of that, the speech quality of that is, moving right along in the trajectory, same sort of trajectory, like just the very elemental quality of synchronizing those, and in whatever way that feels healthy or good or natural. And one of the ways that some folks will talk about shamatha as is an act of simplicity, really, that it should be that even though this technique was a bit complex, so that's the caveat, and we can talk about this, but so even though there was some involvement in terms of like how we were going about this particular way of shamatha focused on the out breath, dissolving out into space, that at its essence, at its core, the notion of sitting or standing or walking and breathing, right? That just we're reducing our focus, we're reducing the amount of places that we're going to go mentally, that it's a simplicity practice in that way. And I don't know about you, but I'm often like begging myself to, just why can't I simplify my life? Why there's so many things going on. There's family, there's the kids, there's work stuff, there's house and domestic, there's relationship, partner, and working on that. There's, spiritual practice and planning and trips and travel. And I mean, we modern people, I mean, we're a little bit, we drive ourselves crazy, honestly. And so if like me, you've ever had this just yearning to live the simple life. And so for some people actually we fantasize. And so the simple life is like Google, like doing, I once got this book for someone gave me a book, and it was called Cabin Porn. And it was just pictures of cabins in all different parts of the world, and like how amazing these cabins were, in the middle of whether it's British Columbia or New Mexico or whatever it was. And like just it's all sold on the idea that if I could get to that cabin, I would be living the simple life. So the notion that there is something that we can sit down and do, we don't have to pay to do it. There's nothing, we can just sit down and engage with the simple life in our practice is part of its profundity, honestly. It is certainly for me. And through that simplicity, one of the effects of shamatha is that, and it actually relates to the word abiding, because if you look at what that word abide or abiding is connected to, it's connected to abode, which of course means home. And it also engenders a certain quality of like trust. So that's interesting to think about, that by simplifying our life in this technique, that actually what we're doing is we're doing learning to trust myself practice, right? Learning to trust that, on the really hectic days, like learning to trust that I can put up with myself, honestly. Because again, if you're like me, there's the days where we kind of wonder, like, am I really gonna make it with this guy, for the long run? I am not so sure. And then and then I engage shamatha, and then there's a little quality of like things settling, but I think it's not just a de-exciting or de-accelerating of the nervous system. There's this notion of, oh yeah, I can actually, even if it's just for a couple breaths, I can come back. Like I can trust myself to come back to the simplicity and back to just what is happening now in my breathing, and not be so lost in my thoughts that I'm going to forever be lost there. And I think part of the stress really is just generally in life is like wondering whether we'll just like a balloon go off into the ether of constant discursiveness. And so shamatha reminds us, oh yeah, I can trust that I can come back to something that's just true and very elemental, very basic and very simple. And that's an important trust to build up, because again, we can lose, even if we've built that trust up and doing some good practice over whatever period of time, we can kind of lose, that trust gets shaky, and then shamatha brings us back more in the realm of trusting ourselves. The posture, one thing I want to just say about the posture, and as I alluded to before, we could have a whole class, a whole series on posture. To me, this notion of putting our body in a position of wakefulness, which is having an upright posture, whether you're lying on the ground or standing or sitting, where we're traditionally sitting, right? For me, doing this for 20 plus years, what I more and more appreciate is that just by sitting down in a posture of wakefulness, like even if I'm not going to meditate, even if I'm not going to do shamatha, just sitting down on my cushion, something shifts in my mind. There's some basic thing that happens when we send the signal to our mind through how we arrange our body, that there's a kind of openness and wakefulness and receptive quality to what's going on. It's like then the mind can say, okay, you're going to show up. You're not going to just get lost in distraction. You're not going to go off into some, chasing some craving or something that you're fixated on. It's actually just about staying here. And by practicing shamatha, putting our body in that position, it begins to remind the mind every time the body goes there. Every time we arrange our body in that position, the mind says, okay, we're doing something a little different here. We're doing wakefulness here. And that sends out ripple effects in our consciousness that I think are actually quite meaningful. So let's talk a little bit about this breath thing in this practice. Of course, it's a concentration practice, and we are, in some sense, you kind of say yoking ourselves to the breath, right? We are connecting ourselves to the breath. The breath becomes our home base in this type of concentration practice, which is, of course, very familiar. There's many traditions that use the breath as the object of meditation. So one of the ways it's talked about is that the breath is a transport, particularly in this case, for the mind. The breath is the transport for the mind. So, that's important because it's a way, it's both metaphor and also quite literal, that like, if your intention is to become, is to be in the moment, is to be with what is to abide in what is true for you in this particular moment. You imagining we get on the transport, just like we would get on the train or the bus or the car, whatever it is, or the kayak, and we kind of set ourselves into a particular direction of like, I'm going to be here. The breath is here. The breath, that really what we're doing when we're aligning with the breath is, the secret sauce of it is that we're coming into the present moment. That's why we use the breath. The breath brings us into the present moment. And so there's this quality of transport, particularly in this practice where the out breath, right? You're following the out breath out. You're going out. So it's transporting us, and there's and as a transport, what what this technique of shamatha is doing is like, it is a place for the body, speech, and mind. We're synchronizing them, as I said, and then they can kind of get on the transport, and they can be going together on the transport, right? Like body, speech, and mind together, synchronizing on the transport of the out breath. We're all here. We're all riding together. Everyone's happy. No one's getting car sick. We're just, going together, moving along. And then in this technique, something very interesting happens, which is that we dissolve into space. The instruction is to dissolve the out breath, which is basically dissolving mind into the space around us. So what does that mean? One of the things that it means, that it's so obvious that we miss it all the time, is that we are in space, right? We are surrounded by space. It's like fish swimming in water. Did the fish know they're swimming in the water? Was that like an old Zen joke or something? Like, do you know you're breathing air? Do we remember that we are in space? So we dissolve in space. It's like, oh yes, the space is all around us. As they dissolve in the front, that's fine. But remember, space isn't just limited to the front. It's the sides, it's the back of the body, it's above the body, it's even below the body, even if it's solid, like the cushions in the floor that we're sitting on. So we are encouraged to think about space, the space that's all around us. Now, another kind of wild idea is that the body, speech, and mind gave us a centrality, right? It gave us a place to organize, to synchronize around. Like, here's the me of my body, my speech, and my mind, and I'm synchronizing them so I can be in the present moment. I get on that transport and I go out, dissolve in space. There's no central authority anymore. There's no reference point of the me that is my body, my speech, and my mind. And so if you've ever had the experience of, transporting out, dissolving into that space, and then there's a little bit of a quality of like, what now? Yeah. What now? It is, I think, what is so revolutionary about this practice is it's mixing this sense of space and this sense of dissolving ourselves in that space with, okay, the in-breath just happens on its own. We're not particularly paying attention to it. If we are, it's not a problem. If it's like, well, it's like white elephant in the room. I can't not pay attention to the in-breath. That's fine. It's not we don't have to fixate on not doing the in-breath. It's just we bring ourselves back to the out-breath and we encourage ourselves to dissolve. And as I mentioned in the practice, right, there's a little bit of exertion that happens. Okay, like I'm gonna dissolve myself, and then I'm gonna be in that space, and I'm not gonna know what's gonna happen next. And that maybe is not so comfortable. And guess what? That is the reality of our lives, because we don't know what's going to happen next. So what this practice is doing, breath by breath, is bringing us in touch with what is actually really true, which is when we go out, no idea what's going to happen next. In breath comes in. Okay, let me get back on that transport and go out with it. No idea what's going to happen next. And we sort of begin to acclimate to, we accustom ourselves to this thing that is, you know, many people spend their whole lives avoiding that moment when they don't know what's going to happen next. And so with this practice, we are very gently, very easily practicing the moment of not knowing what's going to happen next. Synchronizing, transporting, going out, dissolving. Out breath comes back. We've synchronized together. We're going out and we're dissolving again and again. So I want to say one last thing before I open this up, because hopefully I'm like throwing out lots of juicy things that you have issues with. Or maybe not. Maybe you love it. Either way. The last thing I want to say is generally about shamatha practice. And this applies both to this technique and to any technique. And I'm going to go further and say this applies to anything we do in life, honestly, but let's keep it in the realm of meditation, which is that a harbinger of whether the practice is going well or is productive or you know, as we connect back to that intention that we had in the beginning of why I'm doing this, well, to feel more calm, to feel more connected with other people, to gain more insight into issues that are arising in my life, whatever your intention was, that the outgrowth of shamatha, an indicator, harbinger, an indicator of how it's going, is a sense of joy. A sense of joyfulness. And of course, as with many things Dharma, this is not your conventional quality of joy. This is not like I just ate the most delicious local gelato that I ever had, and God, am I joyful right now. It's not a conditional joy. It's a joy that, in my experience, arises out of having connected to something that's true, like something that's really true and holds true no matter what. And it's also a joy that's connected to having kind of learned or gained some insight into my own experience in the world. Like, what does it mean for me to be a human being on this planet? So that might mean I simply tune into my emotions and feelings a little bit more. That might mean that I have a specific insight into, you know, how I get so hooked by my kids. That might be some clarity and clear-mindedness around like what's really important. You know, are all the accomplishments really important, or is love and the quality of loving relationships, is that really important? And that the joy arises in the practice, not because sometimes the practice is arduous, or sometimes we're so distracted it really takes a lot of effort to even just stay in our seat, you know, because we're so fidgety or whatever. It's not that every practice session we like feel really great at the end of it, or really calm, or even really clear. It's the joy that arises from saying, you know, I'm showing up for my life. Like it feels good to be present to whatever's going on, even if those things are hard. And there can be a joy in there, in that, and a certain type of appreciation. if the practice is joyless, if it is always hard and there are no insights, and in fact, it more often than not is bringing up painful things, like surfacing something that's painful, whether it's in the body or a painful thought pattern or reliving something from the past that was traumatic, whatever it is, that is an indicator that we should pull back from that practice and not engage that practice, and talk to someone we trust about, meditation, to say, hey, I want to report that this is not joyful for me. And this is a really important thing, because it's important to have a sense of staying with the practice when it's not particularly easy. But if it's joyless, I think that's a distinguishing factor for me of, maybe looking in another direction from what it is. And it's important, that's particularly important to say around meditation generally, because this practice, it's the real deal, like you're dissolving yourself into space, like you're really engaging the fullness of your mind when you do this. And if there isn't the appreciation, if it is always like you're pushing yourself into something, that's where meditation gets, maybe even counterindicated for some folks. So I think that's important to say in presenting any teachings or anything where, you think powering through it or suffering through it is the way. And some teacher said, well, just grin and bear it or grit your teeth and do it. I'm here to say, like, it's not the way. Stop doing it and talk to someone. So that's at the more extreme end, but just in terms of what we're talking about tonight, I think that can be an indicator, touching into, like, is there some quality of joy there, even if it's not always an easy practice. And that will be that is kind of like, okay, you stick with it, keep going, do talk to a teacher if you have questions, but you're sort of on the right track because you feel that bubbling up of some sense of joy, either during, after, or sometime in your post-meditation practice. So I'm going to pause there because I've shared, I said I wasn't going to share a lot, and I feel like I lied, but there's so much to say about shamatha, and I'm just touching on a few things. So I want to give you all the chance to either chat your question or to come off mute and just throw it out there. And remember, you probably all have heard folks say this, your question is most likely everybody's question in some version, or they'll be like, oh yeah, that me too. So put whatever your question is, please feel free to share it in whatever way. And comments, and to if you notice things about your practice, going back a little bit earlier tonight about your practice, something you noticed, reflections just as welcome as the questions.
All right. Yeah, just appreciate your teaching tonight. Thank you very much, David. Yeah, thank you for touching on the, meditation is not punitive, right? I mean, if it feels that way, then I must seek further instruction, or maybe just step away, right? Because my motivation is likely incorrect. Because I'm not being with what is, I'm seeking something from my meditation, right? Which is just another form of objectification. So thank you for touching on that. And then for me, shamatha has always just been, right, a practice where, of course I always benefit from calming down, right? Stepping away from the busyness and the narrative that is my life, right? And so easy and so easily validated in my engagement with it, right? I'm needed, or work is necessary. I mean, I have all these, again, layer upon layer upon layer of ideas about the value of this huge narrative that I participate in, that I create. But I always benefit when I step away directly, right? Because of the calming effect of meditation. But the pivot, right, comes when I choose to re-engage, and I've taken that time and honored that space. Then everything, the whole narrative shifts, and it's beneficial to my employees, to my employers, to my family, to the person at the Burger King drive-through. Only joking. Yeah, maybe you could just speak a little bit to, I'm really trying to keep it super simple for myself. I know I share that every time, because in the past, I've gotten really heady about the language and the experience. And again, getting back to the original point, right? That can be a trap of seeking some idealized version of what meditation is supposed to be versus what I'm hearing from you, and that is mostly just being with what is, and not necessarily needing to constantly be evaluating or I don't know, at least in terms of good or bad meditation.
Yeah. No, thank you, Jeffrey, for all of that and for sharing all of that. And again, you're I think speaking what feels true probably for many of us around the approach and the benefits and the results of it. And I think what's interesting, and what I would offer tonight specifically, and invite you to try this now in your practice going forward, is this notion of that some of the evaluating and getting really heady and like, is this good or is it bad? Maybe beginning to imagine that some of those qualities are associated with the in breath, because the in breath has this way subtly, it can be very subtle, but it has this way of like filling up the sense of that central authority, that me, like, okay, here we go, breathing in, here I am, here's my ideas, here's what I want to do, here's all the things, you know what I mean? Like, we've kind of like, you can just feel that. And then the out breath is there to say, okay, let go of all of that. Just follow it right out and watch all those stories dissolve into the ocean of stories. And it does take a little effort, because I think why for me it takes a little bit of effort to do that is because what I want to do is breathe in and come back to the me, here I am, here's all the ideas and opinions, and then this is saying, whew, dissolve that. Can I make friends with space? One teacher once said to me, space is just solid stories. There's just all these stories out there. And if you breathe out into them, then there is like not this distinction of my story versus your story versus that person's story. You can let go into the ocean of stories. And that is, I won't put qualities on that, because I think that's for each of us to discover when we just go out into space, and all of these things around us, so maybe are all these stories as solid as we thought that they were. this practice begins to invite us into maybe not so solid, maybe not so solid. So that distinguishing between the in-breath and the out-breath, that would be my thing for you to play with a little bit as you try this dissolving on the out-breath technique, or spend some more time with it. I mean, because even if you've done it before, it's, for me, it's like so new every time I pick it back up. Yeah, great question. Others?
I might just follow on to that, but also another thing that Jeffrey said. I recently heard somebody read some old instructions from Trungpa Trungpa on meditation, and I firmly often have that elephant in the room you spoke of about the in-breath.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that it was interesting because I wasn't sure if I heard it right, but that I thought that in this one instruction, this may have just been one time, that he talked about, it seemed like almost a refreshing of posture, like remembering, like almost thinking about like that in-breath was a little bit of a gathering, but like more about your posture and your, like almost a recentering the body in a little bit, and then letting go. Because that was helpful for me. And I don't know if I'm misinterpreting that. And the other thing that I wanted to add, because I think Jeffrey said about an intention of like just being there. And I wanted to just ask about your 3 questions of an idea of, I was just hearing something, this is a Kabat-Zinn thing of like, if if like the reason you're there, he said something to the sense that if you set an intention where you're kind of less than, like where that it was an idea more about like being there versus fixing. And I wondered if you have any thoughts on that, like this idea that like everything is enough, kind of a basic goodness idea of like, and so that like not to fall into that trap, or is it a trap of trying to like set an intention to fix what's broken, or anyway, those were the kind of 2 questions.
Those are great. Thanks, Mark. So the first one, you're spot on. That is definitely part of the traditional instructions, that the in-breath is a place that is a sort of moment to kind of, as you're saying, like sort of regroup physically vis-a-vis the posture, so that there is this notion of feeling good head and shoulders, feeling yourself in the chair, feeling openness across the whatever piece of the posture puzzle can speak to you in that moment. And I think it's true, it can be helpful as the dissolve goes out, and then at some point we are shifting, right? So I think part of what you're pointing to is like, you can dissolve and be out in space, but there is a shift mentally, and this is what can be a little bit jarring, almost, even if it's slightly jarring, is like, at what point do I move from being dissolved in the out breath, dissolved into space, to catching that next out breath? And so that the way Trungpa Rinpoche explained it, as far as I understood, very similar to what you're saying, is that the way to do that, the mechanism to do that, is dissolving out, feeling the body. So not particularly the in-breath, just feeling the body, regrouping in the body, rechecking in with posture, and then going out. And I would just say that instruction is one of those things that it's like, use it if it's helpful. And what you said was that it was helpful for you, and that's great. For some people, that can be like, oh my gosh, that's one other thing I have to do, kind of. And it sort of takes me out of just the experience of just purely going out. So if it starts to feel like you are a switchboard operator, and you're putting something in there, and then you're doing that, and you're doing that, and then you're trying to make all the connections, then it's just this project that, as Jeffrey said, gets very heady. And so then I would just say, return simply just to the feeling of the breath going out. You can always just go back to that. Don't even have to super emphasize the dissolve. You just breath goes out, breath goes out, breath goes out. Really, as we kind of, if you noticed when I brought us in, I didn't immediately go to the out breath. I said, feel the breath coming in and out. And then you begin to focus in or hone into or bring a special focus to that out breath. So that can be the same sort of way as like, do that. And then if you get kind of lost in that, you maybe come back to just your posture and being there, and then reconnect with that out breath. The intention thing is a really good point. I think that there's different, it's probably the way, it's probably just the nuance of how it's presented by a teacher. In this particular instance, I would say that, I'm more interested in just like the first thought of what comes up. And even if that is from a place of not feeling whole or a place of lack or less than, or, that this is something that I'm working on, I personally come from the perspective of I'd at least want to be conscious that that is happening. Because, and that's particularly, we live in a time where there's a lot of like, make yourself better techniques. And so while I wouldn't promise that meditation is going to immediately, fulfill whatever all of those things are that people want to get better at. I would just want to say, if my reason for being here is because I'm so angry at my coworker, and I want to feel more calm, then at least what I've done is acknowledge that I have this strong emotion. And I do acknowledge that there's some aspiration in my practice. Now, I think that getting in touch with like my wholeness and my basic goodness where there is no lack, and sort of like revealing that that is naturally the case, is I don't want to call it a higher aspiration. That doesn't feel right, but it is an aspiration that's informed with a particular view. And so sometimes sharing that type of aspiration or that view is part of the presentation of a teacher or facilitator said, hey, like, and we've been talking about basic goodness, right? In this series, in this class. And so reconnecting to what it means to be basically whole and engaging this practice is really salient. I mean, it's actually a really great thing to bring up. And the 3 questions on a day-to-day basis for me are more just like a barometer, what's going on. And then, maybe if I was going to do a special focus on the intention of connecting with my basic wholeness and my basic sanity, that would be exactly what you're saying, a perfect place to do that. So it's just a nuance of approach maybe in some way of but you're presenting 2 really good sides. And I think it's great to be aware of both of those happening, because there's a little bit of like a relative and absolute happening there in a way. And they completely are interconnected and interdependent on each other. So it's really great to notice those 2 things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting technique. I'm used to just kind of riding the breath, just noticing the breath or just being with the breath in and out. But there's something about that, like focus on the out breath. It was almost like there was a point where I was kind of like, it's almost like a little death, like it's like a little dissolution of everything. And it was almost, at first, almost like a little uncomfortable, but there was this kind of freedom in it after a while. It's just, I appreciate just practicing that. But it was interesting how it just kind of, there's this like, what if it doesn't come back?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, really well stated, Ainsley. And I think it's a powerful technique. And it's interesting because, I mean, your observations are really great and they certainly resonate with me. It's certainly been my experience of doing that practice. And it's not always the first thing that I think to turn to, because it does, I think there really is a lot going on when that dissolve happens. Because as you just touched on, just to reiterate it and reflect it back, like it can be a little death, it can be a little release, it can be a little freedom, it can be a little freak out. And so to me, that's what I really appreciate about this practice, is that it feels true to me, to my experience of like what it means to be alive and what's actually really going on. Think about, this is a sort of analogy. Think about walking. If you've ever done walking meditation in this particular way, I'll just describe it. You can try it on your own. You walk so slowly that as one foot comes down on the ground, the other foot raises up. And there's a moment there where you're balanced on one foot and this foot is in the air. And if you slow that down enough, what happens is you realize part of it is your mind's like, I don't know if I'm going to stay standing because I'm balancing on one leg and I could fall over. So then the next one comes down. That's good. Oh, I'm balancing again. Oh gosh. Okay. Now I'm, and that, to me, that we are actually really on some more microscopic level doing that all day long. I don't know what's going to happen. That's what I said. I don't know what's going to happen next. Okay, I think I know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen next. The other thing I want to say about this is that, the notion of space, of relating to the space around us, this is something that comes in some of the later Vajrayana teachings. And what's been presented through Shambhala and through Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings is this very exquisite, and my limited understanding, a very exquisite amalgam of just basic old school, some use the word Theravadan tradition, the Council of Elders, like the way that the Buddha taught, do no harm and live the eightfold noble path. All of whatever that all means to you. It's like basic 101 Buddhism. And as we know, Buddha later in later kind of iterations of their being presented the Vajrayana to practitioners. And one of the hallmarks of that was relating to the energies that swirl through space. And that's why I said to Jeffrey earlier that this notion of space being just full of stories is that everything is moving and shifting and turning and changing in space, right? There's this constant movement. And so what is the space? What is the air that we're breathing? We don't think about it very often. And so what this technique, it gives us a little taste, a little sense of what that space could be. What would it be like to relate to just open space? It's not unique to the Tibetan Vajrayana teachings, but it's kind of a hallmark of those teachings in my experience. And here it was being presented in the very first meditation that people do. Because sometimes you can go to other traditions and they're going to teach you an incredibly specific mindfulness of breathing, where you're just going to focus from the tip of your nose to your upper lip. and they're going to say, that should be your focal area for weeks and weeks of the practice, or the full cycle of the breathing, or some specific thing. And here was this technique to say, okay, yeah, specific, but then go out and dissolve into space. Wow. That is such a, in some senses, it's really an honor to receive that instruction, because it speaks to a really kind of high level of what we are capable of without like a ton of experience. We don't have to be super advanced practitioners to be given an instruction that is in some levels kind of, some ways like a high level instruction. But yet it's so basic. I mean, and that's the way it's always been presented. Hey, this is just very basic. We're in the world, we're in space all the time. When we all leave this Zoom room in a couple minutes, we will get up and we will be walking through space. That's just what's true. We will be a body and a mind and a heart walking through space. And so that we have a practice that is working on what that awareness could be is, to me, is really, that is this trusting quality. It's this abode, this abiding, trusting ourselves as we move through the world. And what a gift that is. I mean, if that's all what we get is a little bit more trusting ourselves and trusting what's possible with others, that some of you have spoken to. Jeffrey, you spoke really wonderfully to that. You and I need to talk about Burger King on the side, because I'm not sure about that for the health of your body, speech, or mind. But no, seriously, I think I love that you had that observation, Ainsley, because it really does say, hey, that's what's true. And this practice is about relating to what's true about our lives. We're not trying to create some rarefied condition where, nothing bothers us. And a lot of people think that that's what meditation is. I'm going to stop my thoughts and not so many things are going to bother me. And what we hopefully have been talking about tonight is that in some ways it's actually really quite the reverse. It's about relating and being with the things that stimulate us, that trigger us, that are a consternation or a confusion, being with our own paradoxes, all of those things, making a relationship to them so that we trust ourselves amidst all of this constant change in our world. So I think that's a really great place to leave it tonight. Next month, I don't know the sequencing of it, but I am really hoping that Dr. Smalls will be able to present on mind. And most likely we will, in my week of December, we will keep going with Shamatha, right? So I will actually, if you're able to make it, one preview might be that if you've gotten a chance to practice this technique of breath dissolving the out breath, we can maybe do a little bit of a evaluation or just gathering some data on how that went for you. So if you're able to practice this between now and the next section in December, that would be great. And I think that Gail, you're gonna take us out.
Yes, indeed. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight for the online Dharma gathering. We'll be off next week because of Thanksgiving, but please join us the following week on December 1st for an open sitting led by Paul Singleton III. This special session is offered free of charge. Please use the code WDG FREE, FREE, at checkout. We also invite you to consider becoming a subscriber if you're not already. We have a 7-day free trial that you can find on our website, and tell your friends. And then finally, make sure to follow us on Instagram at Weekly Dharma and on Facebook at Weekly Dharma Gathering. So thank you, everybody, and thank you especially, David. It's been a pleasure and a joy to hear your teachings tonight. So
Thank you so much, Gail. Thank you, everybody. I want to just dedicate our time together to the well-being and benefit of all of us here, and going out far beyond, extending far beyond. May your practice and your good hearts and minds be of benefit wherever they might find themselves wandering on this plane or the many planes. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you. Good night.